It's not as bureaucratic. I'll do a little bit if I put this on. Makes it a little bit more.
Video lähtisi valmiina. Kuuluuko nyt? Hei, tervetuloa tänään vastuullisen markkinoinnin ympärille. Meillä on ilo ja suuri kunnia ollut saada tänne Thomas Kolster, eli Mr. Good Advertising tänään puhumaan mainostajien liittoon. Ja Thomas on tänä aamulla ollut puhumassa Sitran tilaisuudessa. Ja me haluttiin tähän iltapäivään tällainen vähän pienemmän väen tilaisuus, jotta voidaan esittää kysymyksiä ja voidaan saada myöskin keskustelua aikaiseksi paremmin aiheen ympäriltä. Eli vastuullinen markkinointi on päivän teema ja toivotan lämpöisesti tervetulleeksi. Welcome, Mr. Good Advertising.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. And first of all, thanks to the Association of Finnish Advertisers for inviting me here today, and of course to Sanoma for hosting us here today in this beautiful space. So at the very end, we're going to have a bit of time for questions, and probably also, let's see how it goes, but we might also just open up for some questions during the talk. So we're here to talk about two interesting things, I think. First of all, the theme of unstereotype, which I think is a theme you can't avoid in these Me Too days. So how do you as an organization and brand deal with that? And then by the end of the day, a lot of the discussions that I want to have with you here today is really around trust and the change of trust that is happening. So as you might have noticed, there is a lot of claims to fame when it comes to doing good these days. So a lot of brands talk about all the good stuff they're doing. And I often compare it to doing good is like pissing in a wetsuit. It starts to feel warm and nice, but it quickly begins to stink. So my favorite outcome of today would be if we can avoid our communication to stink. The thing I've noticed over the years has really been a surge in more and more brands talking about these issues. And the issue there is there's too much talk and actually too little action. And that looks a little bit like this. It doesn't look good. So one of the things I'm going to focus on today is really how do we rebuild trust by actually doing more, by creating a lasting impact. And one of the things I noticed, and I've been in this space for now 10 years, and I've really seen a search for more brands, especially globally, kind of talking about some of these issues that we're going to talk about today. And of course, all of you are familiar with Super Bowl. Probably not because of the sports. We're not too interested in that in Europe, but mainly because it is still one of the pivotal places to look for when are some of your brands here willing to pay $5,000 for 30 seconds of fame. One of them, and I don't know if there's anybody from Hyundai, I don't think there is, but was a program from the US called Hope on Wheels. It's a charitable program. You buy a car, money goes to this charitable effort. $130 million given to this cause over a 10-15 year period. Interesting thing is they ran, during Super Bowl, 2 ads, 2 times $5 million, that's $10 million, add the production cost and all that stuff, that's 15. So where's the balance between saying and doing? Is it okay to spend $15 million to talk about the $130 million you were giving away? I don't know. Let's try and explore that. Another theme which was interesting the year before was, and I think this shows a bit about the consistency as a brand. So I so often see brands that kind of stick their head over water and say, we do good, and then they suddenly disappear again. And I think that can be an issue. One of the ones that were very vocal 2 years ago at Super Bowl was Audi. I don't know if anybody remember this commercial. It's a cute little commercial with a girl who wanted to drive a soap car vehicle and then drives the car. So very much about kind of women empowerment. I don't know how many of you would connect Audi with women empowerment. Anybody? It's not really the thing that kind of comes to mind. And people kind of criticize their effort a little bit. So here's one tweet. Do you also give equal opportunity to advance to executive levels? Your website lists 2 women and 12 men on the executive team. So often, as marketing people, we get so obsessed with the little storytelling and sometimes get carried away, so we forget what are we actually really doing. This was Audi's response in terms of what they felt. You know, we have a pledge, this is what we're going to do. So again, let's try and explore some of that. And of course, what I think is pivotal now is that it's so easy to take on stereotyping as the big thing. I mean, if we look at Time magazine, I think most of you have seen this cover. At least it was really a thing that touched me a lot. And it's basically around the whole title of Silence Breakers. But if we look at it kind of a little bit more historically in terms of advertising and what we've been trying to do, I think one of the early kind of entrants has of course been Unilever, the Dumb movement. You've probably seen there, that little bottle thing. This campaign is probably one of the most famous one that at least goes 15 years back before Always suddenly did the very same thing. So suddenly we have all these brands talking about women and the importance of women. And then as a guy, you can't really kind of forget some of this stuff. You mean a woman can open it? Yeah. Or some of this stuff, which is from this year. Tasty. So maybe it's not so strange that a lot of people look to advertisers saying, really, do you really have a significant voice in this matter? And another brand that kind of took me a little bit with surprise was this one. You might have seen it. McDonald's turning the golden arches around. So it went from apparently male, which I didn't know. I didn't know I'd been eating male the whole time, and suddenly a woman. So trying to have a conversation there. I heard Stockman did the same here. Or Stockwoman. I don't know which one it is. Stockwoman, Stockman. Johnny Walker, the same thing. Launching an edition. Jane Walker. Probably haven't met her, now you're going to meet her. So it's almost like all these brands kind of just hurrying into this space to actually make a difference. And that can be quite a challenge. One of the things that stuck out last year, for me at least, in this space, and I think there's so many campaigns, so I could kind of keep showing them before we kind of deep dive into what is the right way of doing this, was of course this one from Fearless Girl that made a lot of buzz in the industry. And again, the very same thing. We only look at the tip of the iceberg, the storytelling, but this was for global state global advisors. Really great initiative. They created an investment portfolio where they only invest in diverse sports. Again, I think their ratio was 5 women, 18 men on the board. So again, a lot of criticizing. So the saying and doing part is not really easy to deal with. And of course, they created quite a bit of buzz. Elizabeth Warren, the woman that Trump quite condescendingly calls Pocahontas, also stood up for this issue. So it has a whole title in US, in English, called Femvertising, Feminism Pro Advertising. So it's kind of become almost a language in itself. So how do we make sure that when you pretend to let me know that you care, that this is really the thing? And having tracked this movement for so long time, we've really come to the sense that there is something about giving a damn is the new black. But how do you make sure that people trust you, that you're authentic in what you are actually claiming to be saying? And I see this shift happening in terms of not just what we talk about with femvertising, but just in general, brands speaking up for good. And if we look at expectations from people, 78%, and this is from Habits Meaningful, brands would say 78% of people, from 70 to 78% of people, depending on the market, would expect big brands to come up with solutions to some of society's biggest challenges. So there's some trust there. On the other hand, a lot of people say that they don't trust brands anymore, and I think the rise of ad blockers kind of show that. But I was in Amsterdam the other day, and I like to make it very kind of tangible. And again, I see a lot of brands, COS talking about different point of view. You have a brand like Emporio Armani talking about diversity, water company talking about everybody deserves clean, drinkable water, G-Star talking about the most sustainable jeans, and Nudie talking about kind of the close in the loop and repairing jeans and things like that. So it's become this whole movement, and where as a brand do you find your foothold in that? And also because it's difficult, because by the end of the day, what can we actually do about some of these issues? How can we live differently? How can we craft brands differently? And this is not a black and white thing, and I think that is why it's so difficult. The truth is always somewhere in those gray colors. So I don't know how many of you would use a reusable shopping bag. Any of you uses a reusable shopping bag? Some of you, okay, good. So I welcome in. So one of the things is, look, if we look at it, so this is probably your little bag. Don't panic, it's organic. So you'll walk around with that, really proud. And this kind of just shows how difficult it is, because you have to use that bag 7,100 times before it's better than a plastic bag. So we get stuck in this token thing. So how do we craft brands that are trustworthy and where we align saying and doing? I think my pivotal moment in terms of creating what I would call the good advertising movement was actually back in Copenhagen doing COP15. I don't know if you remember the COPs, the climate summits. So I had very high expectations. I was working as a copywriter and been in advertising for quite some time. So I looked up to our elected government leaders to kind of solve some of these sustainable challenges that we were facing. And as you all know, kind of nothing really happened out of that meeting. And the most interesting thing was that was probably the first time I saw so many big brands claiming a lot of the good stuff they were doing. And I found that interesting. One of the biggest and most expensive billboards in Copenhagen got bought by Fiat. And their best sustainable claim, remember this is in 2009, was we drive our cars by train to Copenhagen. That was the most important thing they could tell me. And I thought, that's a curious claim. Is that really the best you can offer me in faced with all these challenges? So that kind of sparked the book and the movement with a very kind of simple correlation that if you do good for people and planet, it's good for brand and bottom line. Very, very simple equation. I'm going to challenge that equation in a little bit as well. So this actually really comes down to a really basic thing is, can we feel that you guys care? Can we feel that when you go out as a brand that you mean what you're saying? Can I feel that? Do I trust that? And showing that you care is not very easy, because it's not like this fireman who's just sitting down. You expect effort, more than just words. And in so many ways, this is the canvas for you to kind of fill out. It's a blank canvas, but how do I know you care? How can I feel that? Are you going to communicate that? And we can't really talk about these things without talking about consumption. So most of the time, the stories I meet out there is, of course, about buying more stuff. Fair enough, we are at least in the short-term selling business, but we're also in the brand building business. Sometimes we get too much into the short-term thing, and I think especially now with the Finnish crisis, I think we came out of the crisis a little bit earlier in Denmark, but you could kind of feel the sense of brand being pushed aside, and it was all about sales, which I think is an issue. We need to be brand custodians as well and build and maintain trust. So the stories are actually not very different from what we used to have in the 60s, which is kind of mind-blowing that it's still the same stories we're telling about, having this maybe second engine that's a bit more of a leisure engine compared to the other one that you take out for your little fishing trip. And I really see this changing. I mean, when I was 14, and you might see this from your customers as well. When I was 14, my biggest wish was a boombox. You remember one of those with a CD player, 2 cassette tapes. That was my biggest wish. And my parents were school teachers, very sensible people. They will always read sexism into whatever ad word you show them. Very sensible people. Having their son in advertising was not a good thing. They probably dreamt of university. But so that was my biggest wish. After a lot of nagging, I finally got it. My brother's oldest daughter, Clara, she's a tiny little girl. Her biggest wish when she turned 14 and she called her favorite uncle, I can claim that as an advertising guy, so always selling a little bit, but her biggest wish was jumping out of an airplane in a parachute. 14 years old, tiny girl. But it kind of shows the shift and the pivot, which I think is so important to talk about, away from stuff to experiences and self-realization. And I think as a marketeer, that is so important, because that is ultimately, when we talk about purpose, you all heard about purpose, right? Going to talk a little bit about purpose a little bit later. But purpose is really not about the selling. It's about what you actually really truly deliver to people. And when we see what people actually do share, not about statistics, it's things like people-powered transportation. It's things like taking care of resources, urban gardening. It's about a different way of eating food. So for some reason in our industry, we're obsessed with one trend, and that is digital. All the conversations we're having is around artificial intelligence, automation, all that stuff. And we've spent so many conferences talking about this one topic. But if we actually look at it, what are the things that are going to transform the brands we all should take care of going forward? Digital is just one. The four other things have this little word that is so difficult to understand, but sustainability in front of it. One of them, this is from Cairo, I was there not too long ago, is urbanization. This is actually a place where people live. I don't know if any of you have been to Cairo recently. You have. It just continues. This is on the way to the Giza pyramids. You don't really see that in the tourist pictures. But the interesting thing is, so urbanization. So how do you deal, if you're a car company, how do you deal with more and more cars in the cities? Another thing, climate change and resource scarcity. I don't think we need to talk about the weird weather. I think we experience that on a daily basis. But I want to talk about another thing, though, which is stuff. So this is going to be super embarrassing, because this is actually my mess. So this is my basement. This is my one attic, and this is my second attic. I could probably be a bit more organized, but all of us have so much stuff. I mean, look at it. When you go to a flea market, you don't really know what to buy and sell, because there's just too much stuff. So when you have a client, or when you have a brand like IKEA going out and talking about peak furniture sales, that they cannot sell more furniture in Europe, sounds mind-boggling, doesn't it? But if you think about it, I grew up in a fairly nice big house. Today I'm in a squeezed apartment in Copenhagen. Flip the same thing for those of you who actually moved to Helsinki. So smaller spaces, and that's going to be the trend going forward. And things like water. We don't talk about that in marketing, but I was in Cape Town a couple of weeks ago. This is all the water I could use in the shower. You probably heard about Day Zero. It was terrible to actually experience that firsthand. To know that that could have potentially been the city that would run out of water first. So do we think about that? And when things like this happen, people look to brands and say, what are you guys doing about it? This was my little reminder in terms of shower time. I love my morning showers. You do when you live in a cold country. Demographic change. We are, as an industry, still obsessed with young people. I don't know why we are. This is actually my mother rowing around New York. I mean, if you remember your grandmothers, all I remembered was them knitting. I mean, my grandmother was always knitting and baking. Today, it's a different thing. People expect differently. And they want a different life. They want experiences. They want self-realization. They don't want to be put in an old elderly senior citizen home in Rotterdam. So that means something for brands as well. How can you create an interesting platform? So in our part of the world, people are getting older and older. I think the average age in Helsinki is about 42 now as well. In Mozambique, it's 17. So for those of you who work in global companies, completely different things. It's job, it's education. Demographic change which has probably been prolonged a little bit than people expected, but emerging economy is still thriving. This is actually a historic picture. So this is from Saudi Arabia. If you're bored at work one day, do look up #RichKids on Instagram. Some fantastic education and what not to do in this world. But why is it historic? Because last year it got banned. You're not allowed to have tigers as pets anymore in Saudi Arabia. But it kind of shows the wealth and how we flaunt that. And in a way, we can laugh at that in our part of the world because we are slowly changing in a different set. This is the only thing we're obsessed with, digital. Another historic image. This is a car driving through a 35 mile per hour zone with, I think, 42, gets stopped by a traffic cop. The cops pulls the car over, looks into the driver's seat, and there's nobody there. So the first time a driverless car has been stopped on the road, and unlucky for that cop, it got caught on camera. Poor guy. So I'm going to share a few bullshit busters along this presentation. And the first one is, are you at the assembly line working on briefs, or are you solving stuff that matters? Because most of the way we work, or you work, is still on a short-term thinking. You hand out a brief to an agency and you expect some sort of answer back. So a very industrialized way of working. And I think we need to change that into a more collaborative approach, and I'm going to get back to that. Because first of all, the stories we're telling needs to change. So suddenly there's something about those megatrends. It's apparently not just digital, there's something bigger at stake here. And I think the way the stories are changing is that it used to be just the tip of the iceberg that we were. When I started advertising, that was the only thing that mattered, the little tip of that iceberg. So we could do the fun campaigns that I showed about women empowerment, and nobody would really question it. Nobody would say, how many women do work in your company? Nobody would really ask you that question because it didn't matter. It was advertising. Today, when Coca-Cola go out and talk about Fun Factory or Taste the Feeling, people might not feel that that really reflects it because they might see Coca-Cola as the fat factory. That gets them on this beautiful cover of Bloomberg Business Week. Would you believe I'm just big boned? Maybe we don't. And is Coca-Cola pivoting its portfolio enough towards low-calorie drinks? Bloomberg Business Week might not think so. So these challenges or these things are constantly being challenged, and I think it really comes down to the fact, and I think most of you in this room knows that, of course, that we're not in control of these conversations anymore. This guy is. We all are, because we created massive amounts of content. I think probably the best way of illustrating that is when good old Buzz Aldrin went to the moon. He took 5 photos. Any of us going to the bathroom in a little break will probably get up to like 37 photos before we kind of get the post-perfect image that can be shared on Instagram and Snapchat and all that stuff. So how do we deal in this world where everything we do is being challenged? I think that is why the primary role, I think, of marketing today is really being a brand custodian, taking care of the brands and making sure that that trust is intact. And so why I see sustainability as something very important is really because it pivots the conversation. So you all seen the Always Like a Girl campaign. Like a girl? Always? No? Some of you? Good. Anyway, very, very quickly for those of you who haven't, it's Always that went up and talked about, again, women empowerment, so young women being stereotyped. So that was kind of the main thing. But if you think about it, the pivot, P&G has probably been the best at kind of, cutting advertising into something that was really measurable. So like X amount of seconds, a logo up here, and you'd have Mildred Brown confirm that everything was in place. So I think it was interesting that they changed that model. First of all, because before they talked about product. And if you think about people being in control, you need to be in that dialogue. So I don't know how many of you would actually make a tweet about the sucking power of a hygiene pad from Always. Have you done that? Dear friends, you should check out Always. The sucking power is amazing. Have you seen that tweet? I haven't. Or the danceability? Like, you should use Always because it's best. When you dance, the wings are just amazing. Nobody writes that. And still, as marketeers, we talk about our products as they are king. Why do I like sustainability? Because it talks about stuff that matters. How we see our society, how we see relations between people. And when you do that, it really changes the conversation. And it did so for P&G. It started so for Unilever. When I was a kid, around 14 as well, and this is one for the guys, I used to wear Axe Musk. Remember the little... Yeah, so when you're 14, and I'm a pretty tall guy, you grow quite unequally. So I was not pretty when I was 14. Everything was like that. So here's a brand that promised me that I'm going to get laid instantly if I spray on this stuff. Super sexist. If you're Unilever and you have a guy, a CEO in top that's called Paul Polman and talks about doubling growth while having environmental impact, doesn't look too good to have that sexist cousin or the bad uncle in the party. So what are you going to do? And I think, first up, what they did was, of course, ask research. I think that's what happened, because the first campaign they came up with was our peace campaign, world peace. Funny enough, the first correlation there was a survey where they asked millennials, because we focused on young people, what is the most important thing for you? And people said world peace. So they looked at that and they made a peace campaign. Of course, not a really exciting campaign in any way, because who can be against peace? I mean, does it reflect acts and the provocative nature of that brand? Not at all. So last year they did something in the UK that I thought was super bold and something that has talk value. They talked about the biggest killer of men in the UK. So remember, you want to sell things to me that probably buy into the provocation of that brand. Young people want to be provoked. So they created a campaign around male suicide together with a non-profit called Calm. That is brave. I think that is really brave. Or another one from Ariel, of course, in a market where men doesn't do any household work, India, to talk about share the load. So it's interesting to see these brands talking about things that people talk about in their daily lives. So I very much look at this space as a dinner conversation. So the most important thing for you is to find an interesting point of view and to talk about that. So now we talked a little bit about framing the conversations, but as I said initially, that is not enough, because talk is cheap. And some of the stuff I talk about is not new, which makes me super sad. So I found this poster from 1970, just to show how little we learn in advertising. So 1970, the fall, and it talks about how a designer needs to make a deliberate contribution to society. He must be able to integrate all he can learn about behavior, resources, ecology, and human needs. Taste and style just aren't enough. There was only male designers back then. Apparently there wasn't female designers back then. But it's talking about some of this stuff, and we haven't learned anything. So the conversation that's important to have, are we just talking about a positive impression, or do we actually really talk about changing, pushing the needle a little bit? Because we all know these facts, that people today are buying into companies that have and are value-driven, purposeful, if you want to call it. These figures are actually up with 30% over the last 3 years. So this is something that I think we should talk about in the Q&A afterwards, if this is something you experience. Another thing is the correlation between doing something for people and planet and brand and bottom line. And this is actually a survey that's done each year from the Gun report, and looks at the most effective campaigns from last year. These are the top 20. 15 of those, some of those campaigns you might know, would have some sort of what I would call good advertising aspect to it. And of course, the Unilever thing that came out about 3 years ago, when Keith Weed went on stage in Cannes and talked about actually today their purposeful brands grow twice as fast as the conventional brands, and today deliver half the growth of the Unilever portfolio. So in a way, I would say that yes, it does pay. There's a correlation about some of this stuff, but let's push it a little bit further, because it very often becomes something about just being nice. Let's just be nice, and let's talk about nice stuff. Let's be nice to the little puppy. It's such a nice little puppy, so we should be nice to the little puppy. The thing is, this is so difficult to implement. It's difficult to get saying and doing right. I talk about the two-headed purpose monster. And it really kind of reflects back on any organization. Because on the one side, got the very powerful animal, the bull, same bull that's outside the New York Stock Exchange, saying, let's sell stuff. Profit, 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 profit. And then on the other hand, you have the cute little lamb that says, oh, let's do some good stuff. Let's do purpose. Let's talk about women empowerment. Let's talk about all this stuff. How does this work? It doesn't work very well because it doesn't end up being an equal pull. So you have a movement, something like this. It's not a very effective organization. And most of you run that organization on a daily basis because you haven't made it a single-minded movement. I'm sure most of you have values, right? In your companies, 5 to 10 maybe, 12 if you want to stretch it. Then you have your mission, right? You all have a mission. Good. On top of that, you have a vision, which is the longer-term goals. How many of you have now a purpose? Hands up. Anybody work with purpose today? Only 2 companies, 3, 4, 5, a few of you. How does that fit into the structure? Is that put on top? Mission, vision, values, mission, vision, purpose? That's a pretty unstable card house already, right? If you're an employee working in that and you want to navigate this little car, you don't really know how to drive it, it's not very easy. I remember I did a talk in Unilever, and this very smart, career-focused young woman, marketeer, and she raised her hand and she said, I believe in all this stuff about doing good. I get that. But by the end of the day, I'm probably going to be in this job a year, 2 years more. Then I might shift to another brand in the Unilever portfolio or to a different company. Why should I stick my neck out for sustainability, for doing good? And they have KPIs for it. So another of the bullshit busters is, of course, is your purpose embedded in your mission? Are you really able to make this a single-minded movement forward? And also the interesting thing, and I'm just going to challenge the thing I put forward about good advertising being good for brand and bottom line. Because remember, there actually was a time when a principle would cost you something. Remember that? You would say, you'd look to somebody and you'd say, oh, that's somebody who want to put something at stake. This is a bold move. Today it's almost like when you have principles, you want to earn money on it. I have so many clients coming in and saying, let's embrace sustainability because we want to earn more money. I'm like, that's not a principle. What happened 2 days ago with the whole Cambridge Analytical thing and Facebook was interesting because not only I saw there's somebody from Nordea here, but not only did Nordea go out in the ethical portfolio and blacklist Facebook, well done on Nordea, maybe a little bit early as well, but well done. Elon Musk said, I pulled the plug on my SpaceX account on Facebook and on my Tesla account. Although then the clever journalist from CNN, of course, asked, what about Instagram? Because they got 2 million followers, they got way more followers on Instagram. But still, it's interesting. But that is principle, because you actually do what you're saying. Why is this so difficult? I think it's difficult because it's difficult for us. When we deal with some of these things, and we talked about the reusable shopping bag, it's difficult to change. So most of the time we are two-headed monster, and we feel like Homer Simpson, stuck about doing the right thing and the not so right thing. I think that's why we think it's so funny. Because we understand that, the dilemma between having to eat the donut and just be a couch potato and, the exercise stuff. I mean, how often have we done the New Year's pledge and nothing really happened? Running shoes still lying in the corridor. We've all done that. It's so difficult. Because we want to be guided by principles, but, there was these pants, and they're on sale, and they're cheap. You buy them, and then you don't think about somebody else paying that price. So it's not easy to be us as consumer, or people, rather, let's call them people. And it's not easy to be brands. One of the challenges, of course, the whole transparency thing, that it's so easy today, and I think we see breaking stories each day of companies losing value because of the brand is being challenged. I mean, it shouldn't really be an eye-opener. Like Naomi Klein back in the days when she wrote No Logo, talked about the brand being the Achilles heel of the organization. This is what you can attack today, and people are doing that. I mean, think about it. Facebook lost 56 billion US dollars. So to put that into perspective, that is actually half the total state budget of Denmark that's lost in value. So when people say marketing is not important, they got to be kidding. When people go and say, why does McKinsey the consultants earn so much? I don't get it. Because we should be the ones that has to safeguard and protect that value. We need to value marketing. And one of the things, you can't have an advertising presentation without cute babies, cute puppies, and of course naked people. That's what the advertising break got. So they are your naked people. Brands coming through and saying, we want to be naked, we want to be transparent. And it's no easy feature doing that either. So some of you might know what these two numbers refer to. Anybody got an idea? Nope. It's not that late in the afternoon. Somebody come up with a great idea? Outlet price? Yes, it could be. Yeah, it could be one of those China stores. $1 shop, yes. Anybody else? It could be. People on the live stream can probably guess what via Twitter as well, so I can read those out later. These are actually a quite interesting thing, because in 2011, Justin Seitz, the CEO of Puma at the time, he's now moved up to the mother company Kering. He said when he was delivering his financial results, as any CEO does, and it was a good year, he also said, we at Puma fuck up, he didn't use that word, but fuck up the environment for 142 million euros. That's how much environmental damage we do each year. Quite impressive. But why did he say that? Because what you cannot measure, you cannot change. So that one, the white one, is the old collection. The new one is the Untitled collection, and that is the price of the environmental damage. So you cut €1 off. And if you actually look at it, they even put it on their products. These are, of course, only estimates of an environmental damage: waste, land use, water, air, greenhouse gases. And this is important because it really does challenge the very way we work as marketing people, because we're too focused on the story. We actually don't operationalize the stuff we do. And if you think about, why do we get in trouble as brands? Why do people think we're lying? Because most of the time we are lying. What we're saying, stand up for women, and people look at our boards and they're like, really? Is that your thing? You have 3 women working in your organization? Are you going to go up with world peace, or how is that even working? There was without mentioning the brand name, but there was a campaign in Denmark recently that talked about an incredibly important topic, and I love the topic, divorce. I mean, half of people in Denmark get divorced. Interesting topic. As a car family brand, kind of makes sense. Although I couldn't help thinking, what happens if you get divorced and you work in that company? Is there any help? What do you do with your staff? Not good. And what really pushes this is, of course, more and more technology making this transparent. This is a company called Provenance. It's a startup. But what they do is they use blockchain technology to measure everything along the supply chain. So the fisherman who catches the fish, the very fish, the driver, everything. And that is not fun if you're not ready to be transparent. There's this saying, if you gotta be naked, you better be buff. So are you buff enough to deal with nakedness and be transparent? So again, the thing is, why are we then so obsessed with the likes and the views rather than what we're actually doing? What you cannot measure, you cannot change. And I think that is also coming back to the two-headed purpose monster, in the sense that we need to put these things into a framework and build a strong foundation. So when people talk about purpose, I again kind of goes back to saying, how do we actually build a more sustainable business? So sorry about bringing the sustainability word in here again, but how do you build that sustainable business? And it really begins by changing your business principles and putting a foundation in place that is different. So having targets and having ambitions. This is Interface. They went on a mission called Mission Zero. So minimizing the impact of that company. Kind of makes sense. A lot of your companies is probably in the very same journey. So what they done was, for example, they did an initiative where they collected fishing nets in Southeast Asia and they turned them into carpets. They have modular carpets, which is also a genius idea in a way, because smaller homes and all that stuff. This is a modular carpet, so the place where the carpet is most worn, for example here, can now be, one of those tiles can be swapped with the tile underneath this desk. So in that way, you reutilize it in a better way. But they've even pushed it further, and this really shows where some of this stuff is going. They said this is not about lessening our impact. This is about contributing to a better world. This is about undoing all the damage we've done. So this is the new mission that is called Climate Take Back. This is a bold move. And they talk about 4 focus areas. The one that I think about is really about loving carbon emissions. Sometimes it takes love to change stuff. What they've done is they've said, we're not going to minimize our carbon emissions. We're going to solve it. We're going to suck out carbon of the atmosphere and clean the world from carbon. One of the things they have in pilot is a new carbon. And if you think about it, this is, in a way, kind of the way that nature works. You know, photosynthesis binds carbon into trees, plants, and all that stuff, all fossil fuels, millions of years ago. They've done that in an industrial manner, so they suck out carbon of the atmosphere and make that into carpets. These guys have strong programs in place, what they want to do and how they want to do it. So when people talk about what is your environmental claim, this is bold claims. And unfortunately, I judge a lot of competitions over the year in advertising and around impact. And most of the time, I get super disappointed about the work I see, because most of it is gimmick. There's not a lot of impact, and there's not a lot of change. So where that change comes from is most often actually from social and environmental entrepreneurs. And of course, most of you have probably invited some of those into your companies working on an innovation agenda. Some of these people also show why this is changing so quickly and why I think this is so interesting. So I'm going to share 3 nerds who've done something amazing, because nerds do that on a daily basis, that's changing how we eat, how we dress, and how we live. So probably all what we are doing in this room, right? So the first one is set out to change the fast food industry, specifically the burger, eating meat, not so good, climate friendly and all. The price of this burger is $325,000. Quite an expensive burger, right? But it's not one of these Japanese one, wakayui or whatever they're called, that's massaged. This is something we all have in our bodies. It's muscle tissue. So it's grown in a lab, and when it was served to a selected crowd of invited chefs, all of them says, this tastes horrible. So, 2011, 2015, the story came out again. Now the price is down $11.25. Very soon a very happy cow. Price gone down. But when the chef tasted it, a new group of chefs, they said it tastes as good as a McDonald's burger. So now it's up to you to judge if you think that is a good tasting burger. But anyway, it also shows the progression. That the same thing we've seen with digital and Moore's Law. If you know Moore's Law, it dictates that the power of the computing chip is doubling each second year. Kind of makes sense if we have our iPhones. We kind of see how that is going, right? So the same thing. Why wouldn't the same thing apply to sustainability? So this changes how we eat, potentially. Another nerd I want to talk about is Erin Smith. So she was getting married, and she thought, this is her big wedding night. And she thought, I'm going to buy this dress, but only wearing it once. That's absolutely crazy. I can't do that. She was so passionate about it. So she sat down. She's a microbiologist. So she took household waste and mushrooms, as you sometimes do if you're a nerd, and she grew a dress. Not sewn it or planted a cotton and harvested. She grew a dress. And it kind of looks a little bit like this. So I don't know if there's any fashion brands in the room, but you'll probably all say, I'm not going to get married in that dress. I mean, if you showed up in the dress, I wouldn't marry you either. But the point being, give it a few years. And think about the mindset that when we talk about resources, both of these are internal resources. You can keep growing this stuff. You can grow 1 million dresses, or you can grow 1 million small beef patties. How we live, how we dress, how we eat, how we dress, and how we live. This is a village that's being built in Holland right now. It's by a Stanford guy, James Alley, and he wants to create a 100% self-sufficient city. Self-sufficient with food, self-sufficient with energy. So what does that mean to your current business models? So when people look at technology and they're obsessed with technology, I think we're missing a quite big point. But also the second thing is, this is really not just about the saying part, it's about the doing part, getting those two to correlate. And I see some exciting stuff happening for car brands that realize today we might not sell cars anymore, but we sell mobility. A lot of car companies have said that. One of the earlier ones was, of course, BMW. I don't know if you have the Drive Now program in Helsinki. Do you have that? Drive Now, yeah. It's really, it doesn't seem like a big innovation, but if you think about it, if you can't sell more cars in the city and young people don't want to have a car because it's an asset that's being used, 20 minutes most of the time, this is a great way of thinking differently about your business model. Or this one, the Fairphone, a different way of creating a phone that's more circular, that's made out of fair materials. But it could be even smaller things that you think about. Procter & Gamble did their Head and Shoulders packaging in France and now continuing out in other markets out of beads plastic. So a different way of producing stuff and communicating this stuff. And I think this is the interesting conversation in terms of value as well. Because we need to talk about sustainable brands. How do you get investors to think that you've got things in control? I was in Detroit in June last year, and Rob Ford, the third generation Ford, was supposed to come there and do a keynote. He didn't show up on stage because something happened in his company. He had to fire his CEO. So the CEO was actually given the role of turning Ford around, and actually succeeded turning Ford around, got sacked. In his place was the guy who's responsible for the driverless car division. So it kind of shows that if you want to maintain the trust in the company, that balance between sales and purpose needs to be right. And if you look at the Fortune 500 companies, the interesting thing is here, the green one being the one that's weighed on environmental, social, and governance factors, and this has been done since 2009, outperforms the other stocks for 2.4%. But if you think about it, if you are an investor, like the example I had with Coca-Cola, wouldn't you say people drink low-calorie drinks? Some might not want to have calories in the drinks. They might want to drink water. Coca-Cola doesn't have a lot of water. Is that a safe bet? If you want to invest in a car company, do you want to invest in General Motors, or do you want to invest in Tesla? So this is about future-proofing brands, and I think we should be in the business of doing that and making sure that we don't do missteps. And that's why when people define a purpose, I think it needs to be built on a platform that's measurable, that when people can hold you accountable and you can change your organization. So this guy used to be top of the purpose circles. It's Howard Schultz. So he's on Time Magazine for all the good stuff he does in the US, education, veterans, which is a big thing in the US, and jobs. Don't tell Trump you can also be on Time Magazine for bad stuff. Hitler was on Time Magazine as well. But he was there because of some good stuff he's done. But the thing is, today people look at this in a holistic manner. And even though this has been rated one of the most purposeful companies, probably some of you have read his books, Changing Communities One Cup of Coffee at a Time, people suddenly went into Starbucks stores and did sit-downs and protests and was revolting against the brand for the very simple reason that they talk about doing so much good, but they don't pay their taxes. They pay as much tax in Austria as a sausage stall. In the UK, it was even worse. It was one blue-collar worker, so the same as one plumber. That's as much tax. So again, how do we deal as brands with these issues? Tax is not easy. Tax is not an easy issue because it's an equal playing field. Nobody is paying more tax than we should. But it's an issue. But the interesting thing, and this is something that I'm very, that I think is the forefront of where purpose is heading. Going back to the story about what it was Clara, my niece, buying, the experiences, the self-realization, not the stuff, the bigger stuff. And a young girl from Sweden, Marie Delacroix, she wanted to believe in Steve Howard's vision of purpose and Starbucks and all the good they're doing. So she wanted to apply for a job in Starbucks. She didn't get it. Unfortunately, her hair was blue. So diversity fine, women fine, blue hair not so much. Don't know why actually. Maybe you don't want blue hair in your coffee. I honestly don't know. But it's our luck though, because what happened was she got so provoked, so she wanted to start her own business. So as I said introductory-wise, between 70 to 78%, according to Habits Meaningful Brands, want brands to solve the issues. Last year, I saw a statistic from Edelman that scared me, because today, 46% of people in the US says they want to be the ones in charge. They want to be the ones that change stuff. So the little baby with the not-so-nice finger is maybe interesting to look at. So what Marie Delacroix did was she said, let me start a business that's for everybody. So everybody who's passionate about coffee, like she was, can be part of that business. And it's called Wheelies. And it's kind of like a coffee bike type thing with organic selections and all that stuff. But the real interesting thing is the model. Because the business model that most of probably your, depending on what business you're in, if you're in retail, you probably know this, the franchise model, where if you want to have a Starbucks, you've got to have a pretty hefty paycheck, $500,000 in average, probably even more for McDonald's these days. But her little mission is $5,000. Probably if my niece nags my brother too much, she could probably get a coffee bike. Why is this important? Because if we look at purpose, purpose is when you wake up in the morning and you have this burning sense that you want to do something. Where do you feel the biggest purpose? When you go down to your Starbucks? Or when you have your own coffee vehicle? Where do you get the best service? Because by the end of the day, this is about this very same criteria like quality service. Where do you get the best service from the young girl who's doing her Instagram updates in Starbucks? Or the one who actually needs to live day by day by running her own little business? But the most scary part about this is what she talks about, because she talks about breaking the hegemony of the big fast food corporation and giving people a platform to express themselves. So very much about saying, where's purpose heading? And I think it's very much about the self-realization part. We've been buying experiences for years. We don't buy stuff, buy experiences. But maybe we buy something else today. And I think we are actually buying our ability to do something more. Like my mother who wanted to kind of travel around New York and row around New York. One of my change things, because it's difficult to be in that Simpson space, was for me to get some decent food. And I got one of these, farm boxes delivered at my door with nice organic produce. But even better, they got recipes there. And I wanted to turn vegetarian, at least some of the time. I still love my beef and my fish. It's being live streamed, don't tell that to anybody. But what it did was enable me, and I learned how to cook really good vegetarian food. So I realized that little dream. So I don't actually buy the food box anymore. I actually buy the ability to kind of go on that journey. So it's also important when you talk about purposes to actually enable people. We just create too much campaigns. So I think we are at an interesting point in time where we have a certain way of thinking about organizations that's been based on an old principle about profit. It's been based on an old principle of resources that are scarce, that are fossil fuel based, and a new mindset where companies look to endless possibilities, to renewable energy and stuff like that. And those two things are at quite an interesting twist these days. I think the Me Too movement, in a way, kind of shows that pivot in terms of how people are in control. Because it's not a campaign, it's a platform. Everybody can take part. Everybody can have their meaningful say in that. Movember is another one. Movember is not a bureaucratic Red Cross initiative. It's something, if you want to create a party for all your pals and raise money, you can do that. So it's a platform. So there's 5 things I want to talk to you about. Quite a few things today, just to wrap it up a little bit. This is not about creating campaigns. This is about creating platforms. A platform from Finland that I just want to briefly talk about is actually Ålandsbanken, the Åland Index, if you've seen that one. What they do is they don't only give you a bank statement, they also give you a carbon footprint statement. And the thing is, they say to any other bank that want to take part in that, they can do it. So people can together create change. Sweaty balls beat creativity. We are so interested in great ideas all the time in marketing, right? But the real hard pull is making it happen in the long term. We're too short-termist in our thinking. And I think it comes back to how we work together. We, as I said initially, we stuck with the industrialized mindset. You go to your agency, you give them the brief, you come back and you expect magic. Why does that go wrong? Because the world doesn't work like that. It's not just a story. What you got to do is you got to work better together with the media agencies. You got to work better together with the agencies, because else you're going to fail. Else you're going to end up with campaigns like the McDonald's one or some of the earlier ones that we said was on stereotype. Also invite different people into the marketing departments. I don't think we are equipped to dealing with these things. We've been hiring like crazy in the digital space, but what do we do in this space? I mean, today any sensible board would have somebody who would know something about digital. Most boards don't have anybody who knows anything about this. And the 5 biggest megatrend, it's only digital one of them. The other 4 are sustainability related. Another problem is we are too little time in our jobs to create change. In the UK, the average time for a marketing director, he or she is then that chair for 48 months. How are you going to change anything in 48 months? How are you going to build a brand, a solid brand in 48 months? How are you going to build trust in 48 months? The third one is make it scalable as a virus for good. So make it scalable like a Me Too movement, think in platforms. Fourth one, and I think this is an important one, if you make the right turnaround, if you get purpose at the very center of the organization, there's so much exciting stuff you can do. The fifth one is think about impact. What is it you really do? In the sense, are you really ready to become naked? Do you have pledges in some of these areas? So before you do marketing, put measures in place. What is it you want to do? What is it you want to achieve? How can I hold you accountable? And I think, especially in the Nordics, there is a value that kind of penetrates most of the Nordic countries called humbleness. We don't like to talk about all the good stuff we do most of the time. It's changing a little bit now, as some of the examples have been shown. The problem is, though, that people actually want to know. They want to know what your organization does in terms of social and environmental efforts. And as I said, this is just not about the word that you can't really relate to, sustainability. It's about the themes, the things that people talk about. So, of course, the question is also how unstereotypical are you actually as an organization in a way? Because you talk about unstereotype, but are you actually really ready to kind of embrace some of these kind of different thoughts? One of the guys that I had to talk to when I wrote my book was this guy. Some of you might have seen him before. Anybody knows this guy? Oh, okay. So it is Martin Sorrell, Sir Martin Sorrell. He is the CEO of the biggest communication group, WPP, that employs around 180,000 people. His annual salary is £36 million. Quite a nice salary, so it at least shows that there's some way up the marketing ladder before you reach that pay grade. He's a really important guy, the most important guy in advertising. So of course I wrote him to listen to all his stuff about purpose and sustainability. And it's interesting, this is back in 2011, 2012. And at that time, WPP, as a lot of companies had at that time, a little tab on their website that says CSR, corporate social responsibility. The only thing they had there, though, was not really a pledge about anything. It was just saying we're super responsible. Any questions, write me, Sir Martin Sorrell. Okay, I'm going to write the guy. So I wrote him and asked him about, so where do you think these things are heading? Are sustainability important? And I got a message back from him. That was great. Too much going on, sorry. Very brief, clear though, clear message. I'm going to give him that. And If you do take image of that, remember it is confidential, so remember to tag him and me in that post. I'm sure he's going to be happy about that. As I said, if you want to create change, you've got to be quite stubborn to make that happen. And so I wrote him a second email detailing all the agencies, all his clients, you guys in this room that work together with him on a daily basis or some of his agencies, detailed all of that stuff, sent him the second mail and said, what is your response? I got this one, sorry, just jammed. And why am I sharing this story? I'm sharing this story because the exact same thing is going to happen with you tomorrow. It's Wednesday. You're going to think, oh, we had this crazy Dane, this tall crazy Dane talking about change in marketing and how to regain trust. But the phone is ringing. You have to look at that exciting skiing trip up in Lapland that's so important because else, So you're probably not going to do much about this. So I think the one thing that I want you to do is to think about the one thing that you can apply to your business tomorrow. Of all the stuff that I talked about, what is the one thing that you can apply in your business tomorrow? Whether that is working differently together with your agencies, valuing each other better as partners, rather than kind of thinking of the differences, whether that is thinking about impact, whether that is thinking about the tip of the iceberg is not that important anymore in marketing. If you think about the little thing that Elon Musk did, pulling the plug on Facebook, like by doing something, he created a marketing campaign that resonated across CNN, BBC, Huffington Post. He doesn't spend a dime on traditional advertising, and still he manages to capture the conversations and the imaginations of people. Remember the little vehicle he sent out in space with the little nudging Elvis recently? You saw the SpaceX thing he did? So by doing bold stuff, by having principles, you can really change a lot. And I think, isn't that what the reason why I got into advertising was because of the love of brands. And I think a good brand has to be loved and hated as well. So it's built on principles. But you need to be clear about what your principles are, because else you end up doing some of the stuff that we saw in the very beginning, something that's inauthentic. So think about the one thing that you want to change, because by the end of the day, I think we in the advertising industry has a massive role to play. And all that change really begins with you people here in the room, because tomorrow, hopefully, you have a little thing on your desk and a post-it note, and I might call you tomorrow and just check up if you actually did something. So thank you so much for listening in a little bit about trust. I'm sure we're going to have some questions and some discussions in terms of what does this mean for the Finnish market. Thank you. Great. So I think we have people on the live stream as well, but we're going to share this around for people who have questions.
Ja nyt on hyvä hetki esittää kysymyksiä. Tuleeko mieleen ajatuksia?
Perfect. You'll have to run up there actually. Sorry about that. So probably state your name and what company you're from then.
Hi, I'm Emma from Sector Design. I was wondering when you were talking about the having clear conscience as a company.
Yeah.
What do you feel about this? That a lot of companies nowadays offer you a chance to buy yourself a clean conscience, sort of like freight companies that you pay a certain amount extra money that is put on. Is it a good way to do it?
Oh, well, yeah, okay. I mean, one of the industries that's at least been trying to do that for quite some time is airlines that, of course, add this little extra carbon tax. Has anybody ever done it? No. I think what makes me exciting these days was that a lot of the stuff we talk about used to be a kind of price premium, that you'd pay a lot of money to get the more kind of sustainable, organic, fair, whatever version. But I think a lot of this stuff is really changing quite quickly. If you look at the coffee industry, you almost kind of take it for granted that it's kind of, at least in the bigger cities, that it's organic and fair trade. So I think a lot of that conversation is being pushed. I think you should rather than think about how can you add that extra cost and externalize that cost, maybe think about how can you do something about that internally. Because me as a customer, would I pay for to be frank, the mess you make? Maybe not. If you're an airline, you're the one who kind of, in a way, pollutes together with your customers. And so it's finding that right balance. I think if you look at the fashion industry, for example, quite often it's just asking you questions about that little change. Producing jeans, of course, is not the most sustainable way, at least if it's grown with cotton and uses a lot of water. But it's actually in the usage phase that the biggest impact is when we wash the jeans. So, of course, Levi's and others have gone in and asked their clients to step up and do something about it, wash your jeans less, which actually makes sense, especially as a Scandinavian who wear black, because black is not a very solid color, so it gets washed out and your jeans looks kind of grayish now. And so if you want to keep your pants longer, it makes sense. So I think there's no real one answer, but I would always try to see how you could deal with that rather than taxing your customers. I think that's probably not the best way around it. Yeah? Somebody else? Did that answer your question? I hope it did. Perfect.
Tuliko muita kysymyksiä mieleen tässä kohtaa?
So maybe one thing that I would ask you about is, how does this look in a Finnish context? Do you feel that this is something your customers are starting to care about? Do you feel some of these conversations are important? We had the stockman incident with the stockwoman incident. Stockman, I'm confused still. Is this something you feel is eroding trust slowly? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, but Thomas, you told me in your lunchtime that
Yeah.
you also do workshops
Yes.
starting this sustainable as a part of the business for
Yeah.
companies. What do you think? What is the biggest challenge when you do these kind of workshops?
I think there's
Biggest
yeah.
obstacle.
I think there's an educational gap, not just actually sometimes with agencies, especially that might not have those capabilities. But I think also the point I said about working better together. I think it's really, marketing is so challenged and it's so complicated, and I think it's so important that we start working better together, all of us, to come up with solutions and breaking this brief solution type model. And then education. I think what we've seen with digital and how we dealt with digital, we're going through the same curve, and we're not learning fast enough. And digital is a threat to, of course, the livelihood of our business, but sustainability is as well. And sustainability is a threat to our brands. And what I like about it is if you look at the pivot away from plug-in products to actually talk about things that are more meaningful to people, we forget that. Most of the time, we forget that. And it's maybe not so weird that people block us out sometimes and don't want to engage in us in those types of conversations. So I think education, better collaboration are probably two key things that we need to, and then we just need to talk more about it in general, because it's an underexplored topic, and I think there's a few brands that are very good at this, and there's a massive opportunity for any of you in this room to be a leader in your industry in this field. I mean, if you look at GlobeScan does a survey with our sustainability professionals, the one brand that jumps above all the rest, if we look at big companies, is Unilever. So I think there's a massive opportunity for anybody who can do this in a more sustainable manner to grasp that positioning.
So even for smaller companies, it's a possibility right now.
For smaller businesses, I think there is a massive opportunity in challenging what the big guys are doing. Wheelies is just one, but let me just give you one example that kind of shows that pivot, that goes back to quality, which is probably one of the, price quality, one of our kind of typical marketing principles. When I grew up, Ben & Jerry's was an amazing ice cream. It was probably one of the best ice creams you could get your hands on. Today, it seems a little bit more kind of industrialized, kind of so-so, because down in the corner, you might have 2 or 3 Finnish startups that do amazing ice cream that's homemade with a guy who's just super passionate about it. So again, how do you navigate in that space between the small guys and the big guys? And how do you make sure that the whole customization, democratization, that you understand that? I mean, I was in Berlin, which is kind of like a fun example, because I don't know how you feel about Rittersport, you know, the Quadratis Praktisch Gut, the little thing with the nuts. But they actually did something that I actually thought was quite clever. They had an experience center in off Friedrichstraße, and you could go in there and you could create your own Kindermilkesnitte. So you could put in whatever you wanted, and you'd get it, and you'd actually experience the brand, and you'd feel that it was creative, and you'd feel it was crafted and not industrialized. So I think there's lots of opportunities you can do if you understand that people are in power, and you dare to give up the control. But if you don't have a strong brand, you might not dare to give up control, which is an issue.
Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah.
Yes, hello, my name is Mari Aho and I'm from Alko.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm a sustainability manager.
Good.
So I would like to hear your opinion about the kind of the role of the companies concerning raising awareness of sustainability issues. For instance, living wage is one of the things which we are really much talking about more and more in the Nordic markets.
Yeah.
And what is the role of the companies to kind of raise the awareness of these difficult kind of...
I think that the best way of looking at some of these things is really going back to the very kind of simple white packaging that I showed and say, what is the value add that you can build into that product? Because I think we're at a time where people have pretty high expectations in terms of what they're buying and what they expect of companies. So how do you make sure you live up to those expectations? And how do you guide me? I think a lot of people actually want to change behaviors in some way or another. But it's difficult. And can you help your customers do it? Can you empower them? Can you enable them? I mean, the one with the example with the food box. It took a little nudge, and now I actually really don't set foot in the supermarkets that much anymore. So I think there's a big role of education because there's so many of these topics that people don't know anything about. And people want to know something about it. It's kind of like the dinner conversation again. If it's interesting enough, look at all the attention ocean plastics have gotten these days. I don't think we think it's a very nice thing that every time you wash your polyester sweater, some threads are ending up in the sushi we're eating a little bit later. So I think there's lots of stuff that brands can talk about, and with a strong voice. Because some of you have production and knowledge that is in this field. And also about some of the sensible topics. I mean, we worked with Carlsberg on their new global sustainability platform that was called Together Towards Zero. Moving the organization. I think too few companies spend enough on internal communication. Making sure that everybody in the organization actually knows what that brand and organization is about. So Together Towards Zero was really a push to get everybody in the organization to understand, zero water waste, zero carbon emissions, but also zero irresponsible drinking. Because we Nordics don't have the best relationship to alcohol, admittedly. So how do you work on that? And I think finding that balance is important, and having a trustworthy voice. I think brands are like friends, and I think we respect the friends that help us out, that want to nudge us, that we trust, and so I think there's just a lost opportunity today in not educating people. And if you look at the interesting thing about packaging, I don't know why it is like that, but packaging is one of the most trusted sources of communication. For some reason, we think that what's on that packaging is the truth, and of course it is regulated, but still. So how much do you communicate on that packaging, and how do you communicate it? It's so crucial. So what annoys me a little bit is then when brands minimize the agenda, and I think why stereotype is such an important thing to talk about in our industry, and why we get it so wrong, is because we look at it as communication, and we do these small gimmicks. But if we look at the system, I grew up in the creative industry as a copywriter. I don't think I had any female colleagues whatsoever, maybe one. There wasn't any female leadership in the agencies. You'd have project managers. Today it's changing a little bit in Denmark. We have some very qualified female CEOs right now, which is great. We're slowly beginning to see some female creative directors, not a lot. So if we're going to change this conversation and be more smart about it, how can men still be the ones that make most of the marketing when most purchases are done by women? I think 80% of what is bought by women. But women don't really have that voice. So often we look at things the wrong way because we look at the story, not the structure. And that's why when I talk about sustainable business, I want to have those principles in place all over the place, because else it's not sincere, I think. And it's not easy in your organization and in your role, because it's kind of, another thing is like getting sustainability and marketing people to talk more together. I mean, I often see myself as a bridge builder because it's two different universes. I talked about this morning. Marketing is from Mars, sustainability is from Venus. Sustainability is complex, it's measurable, it's very rational, but everybody in this room knows that for marketing to work, it needs to be emotional, simple, and actionable. So of course it clashes. So it's really an interesting challenge, and I think it's something that, for the love of the brands that we go to work for every day, we need to figure out how we maintain that trust and how we stop bullshitting. And I don't think the way to stop bullshitting is not to talk about the things, but it's to talk about it the right way. And I don't see a lot of campaigns on the topic on stereotype that excites me. And I'm a guy, I wouldn't be in your shoes, in terms of, I mean, is this really why, is this what we want our Clara, young girls to grow up with? I don't know. Yeah. A last question maybe? A last one? Anybody got a last question?
Kuka uskaltaa kysyä viimeisen kysymyksen?
And how many, this is actually for the people on the live stream who can't see it. There's only 2 men in the crowd today. 3, including the 3. Oh, 4. No, yeah, 4 altogether. 4 men out of a big crowd, that's good.
We are maybe more advanced.
Maybe in Finland.
Than in Denmark.
Yeah, probably, yeah. Yeah.
The last question, anyone? As we can say the world has changed and will change still a lot. So now it's the moment for action, and that's why we also, the Finnish Federation of Advertisers, we are speaking about this unstereotype marketing and about this equality also in marketing business. So it's very important subject. And the sustainability is one of the key topics for this year for us too. Hey, thank you, Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. And feel free to ask questions on Twitter. If you are on Twitter, I'm a Twitter freak, and it's only 140 characters, so I can respond quickly. But thank you so much. Thanks.
Mä sanon vielä muutaman sanan tästä tulevista koulutuksista. Eli meillä on seuraava koulutus on Vaikuta videolla. Ja sitten meillä on tulossa tuosta näistä Facebookin uusista algoritmeista. Ja sitten meillä on tuosta kesän alussa on tulossa tosi mielenkiintoinen koulutus myös kansainväliseen markkinointiin liittyen. Ja mitäs muuta. Meillä on aika paljon tulossa tuossa kevään ja kesän aikana koulutuksia. Kannattaa pysyä kanavalla ja kannattaa seurata meidän viestejä. Me laitetaan välillä aika nopeallakin aikataululla viestiä näistä koulutuksista, niin kuin esimerkiksi tämä, että me saatiin nyt tällainen spesiaali-iltapäivä tästä maksutta meidän jäsenistölle Thomasilta, niin tämä oli aika iso juttu, ja sen takia näitä välillä tulee tosi nopealla tahdilla sit näitä kutsuja. Hei, kiitoksia kaikille, että pääsitte paikalle. Kiitos Sanomille siitä, että saatiin tämä tila, ja kiitos myös kaikille live-striimiä seuranneille henkilöille. Ja thank you, Thomas, once again. Kiitos kaikille.